Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. Today is Wednesday the 9th of February 2022, and in this programme today we'll be discussing the Winter Olympics that is currently taking place in Beijing in China. And sadly these Olympics have been named by human rights advocates as the Genocide Olympics, as we see that there are dark and sinister parallels that actually compare the Olympic Games in Berlin in 1936 to these Chinese Winter Olympics 2022. So we'll be unpacking that in that programme. I mean, there's been so much controversy surrounding these Winter Olympics, Reagan, certainly building up to them. Certainly when we look at China's track record on human rights abuses, particularly its plight of the Uyghurs, and we see that the news reports say there are 1 million in forced labour camps, but according to our guest, Gary Lane from CBN, he reckons there's something like 3 million in forced labour camps. And yet that is all hushed up, everything's kept quiet, and that we're just supposed to enjoy athletes at their pinnacle of their career competing in the winter sports. And yet behind it is something extremely sinister.
I've known of the plight of the Uyghurs for, must be coming on 10 years now. This is not a new thing. There were some voices trying to raise awareness for some time, and it only seems to be in the past few years that it's beginning to gain some traction. But this is only one part of China's horrible record against human rights. For many years, you see their oppression of various fringe religious groups. For instance, Falun Gong is a group that has regular displays, even in London, outside of various embassies and whatnot, trying to raise awareness for the torture that their members undergo. Certainly, we've talked on this program before, I believe, about the persecution of Christians in China. They do have a state-sponsored church. If you speak with anyone who has traveled here and is visiting from China, the likelihood is that the people who are allowed to visit are CCP members, and they will tell you initially that there is freedom of religion in China, that they will be very adamant. No, we have freedom of religion. What are you talking about? This is all Western lies, all of this sort of thing. But then when you actually go and you meet individuals on the ground, one of the things that you see is, yes, there are churches that are allowed, but they have to adhere to a very strict set of guidelines, which if they adhere to, basically discounts them from being a true biblical church. Hence why you have such a strong house church movement. These are arrested, they're disappeared, all sorts of things occur to others who are not Christians. If they express any different political views or affiliations, they will be put down in one way or another, or re-educated perhaps. The Uyghurs are actually Islamic in a very, very large percentage. There are Christian Uyghurs, of course, as well. There are Uyghurs, I'm sure, who have no religious affiliation, but in their particular region, which is in the northwest tip of China, I believe, Xinjiang, it's more deserty. If you think Mongolia, it's more like Mongolia's terrain, more sand, more desert, still very beautiful. It's culturally speaking very different, very unique. The food is similar. It's obviously Asian, but it is different from your normal Chinese food that you and I would think.
Less sugar then, yeah.
Yeah, probably less sugar. There's actually a Uyghur restaurant down the road from Rachel and myself, and we tried it out, and it was delicious, really fragrant. But it's an important question we're asking this evening, everyone. We're live and interactive. Why should China be hosting the Winter Olympics in 2022? Spot on, Simon. Comparisons being made to 1936 and the Olympics that were held in Berlin. This isn't a new thing, is it? The Olympics being hosted by despotic states.
We also see that now that China's become emboldened, particularly with a very compromised president in the United States, in President Biden, and also the Democrats are very much in bed with this regime. We see that the Chinese are threatening Hong Kong and cutting down on the democratic freedoms that they have in Hong Kong. We see that they are belligerent against Taiwan. They are being extremely aggressive in the South China Seas. And China is cozying up to President Putin and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that's not to mention the absolutely horrendous human rights abuses that are being committed in China that is effectively genocide. And yet the International Olympic Committee say, we don't want to have anything to do with politics. This has nothing to do with politics. But it does, because to hold such a prestigious tournament like the Olympic Games, in this case the Winter Olympics, is a great honour for any country because the spotlight is on you. But to not even to give any checks or balances to China and just allow China to continue to do this is only rewarding the Chinese regime.
One of the things that is difficult to see about the Olympics, these Winter Olympics being hosted in China, and the Olympic Committee's statement that we're not getting involved in politics. Well, like it or not, you are getting involved in politics, and you're seen as a supporter of the legitimacy of the actions of the political party that has been awarded, in effect, the right to hold these Olympics. There are forced labor camps that the Uyghurs are in. There's merchandise that is being sold that is made in sweatshops, some doubtless by Uyghurs, but regardless, it doesn't really matter. They're made in sweatshops. It's slave labor, essentially. You have similar situation in the construction of venues and whatnot. There's very real security concerns for years. For years, there have been security concerns expressed by our intelligence, and they, are going to put athletes from around the world, media from around the world, coaches and journalists of various kinds from around the world in this place that is known to be filled with there can be blackmail, there can be spies, there can be double agents as well. There can be it's so bad, Simon, that anyone coming from the United Kingdom or the United States, and I'm sure other nations as well, are being encouraged to use burner phones and to leave their own electronic devices at home because of cyber threats.
And surveillance for when they come back as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, what is so, I think, absolutely abhorrent is that with the Uyghurs, as you said, Reagan, they're being put into forced labour camps. They're being tortured. Their organs are being harvested, and we've done a previous programme on that on Behind the Headlines. And also their women are being forced to have abortions and being sterilised. And yet all the West can do is impose a diplomatic boycott on China and the Winter Olympics by our heads of state and our governments not actually going to Beijing to participate in the opening ceremony. That's all that they've done. And of course, the Olympic Committee, International Olympic Committee, say we can't boycott the Chinese Olympic Games because this would be a detriment to the athletes taking place. I can understand if you're an athlete, you've spent 4 years to get to the pinnacle fitness and to perfect your sport, in the chance to actually win an Olympic gold medal and Olympic glory. You can't take that away from the athletes themselves. But I mean, something should have been done in 2020 or 2021 to actually move the Beijing Winter Olympics to another venue because of China's appalling and horrific human rights record.
Well, we shouldn't even be considering any nation that has sanctions of various kinds against it, or at the very least is known to perpetrate human rights abuses. That just shouldn't that shouldn't happen. I mean, what next? North Korea hosting the Summer Games? Iran? What are we going to do? Well, okay, we have Qatar. We have Qatar hosting at Christmas time. The 18th of December is the World Cup final, and Qatar will probably have a similar conversation closer to the time.
We will
about that, because what's going on is it's all about money. It's all about it's not even about entertainment anymore. It's about money. And sponsors and those who are there. China has the money. China owns, through its borrowing and the debt of other nations, it owns practically so much of the world. Its economic power is extreme. Some would say it may even be surpassing that of the United States. It's frightening to observe the lack of moral courage and integrity that even considers China to host such a massive unifying event in the first place.
And we see the same parallels again in Germany in 1936, and we see that Hitler clamped down on the Jewish community with absolute force, as he wanted to show the world that Germany was a major power and a major success by hosting the 1936 Olympics. And in the same way, we're seeing the Chinese regime clamp down on religious minorities, and this has been going on for the last 6 months. So Uyghurs that are living outside of China can't communicate with their families for over 6 months because China has blocked all communication, so they don't want anything going out of China that would give kind of China a bad name.
We are live and interactive. Please do send in your emails and text. Clarissa says, "Hi Simon and Reagan, great program with a subject that should be on all our media outputs. I usually love watching the Winter Olympics, but won't be this time. It's my little protest against this awful Chinese regime." Les comments that China is a totalitarian dictatorship. Chinese efforts to squelch the underground church movement was ramped up in anticipation of the Olympic Games in order to make a good impression on the world. Chinese Christians have paid a high price for Olympics. They have been subjected to religious repression, torture, sexual abuse, and arbitrary detention. Human rights issues include unlawful killings by the government, forced disappearance. Does China win gold for tyranny? I don't know. It's a good question. I think North Korea probably would win the gold in that. China may be coming a close silver, and Iran may be in third place.
Yeah.
That's my medal table for tyranny in the world. Maybe Afghanistan might be in there now as well, maybe in a close fourth place. Maybe like they did in the summer, maybe they'll share medals now, who knows. Okay, so we have Jason saying that he has had in mind for a number of years now that China will play a major role in the end times, so I am not surprised at China's actions now. I think Jason may be onto something there.
Oh yes, as mentioned in the book of Revelation, the kings of the East.
Yes.
Is it amassing an army of over 300?
Yeah, million.
Yeah, 300 million.
To
cross the river Euphrates in Iraq that dries up.
Yeah,
called the kings of the East. So yeah,
China plays a role in a negative way. That negative way. There's also indication that it's not spoken of as China, of course, in the Old Testament, but I believe it's called the people of Sian. I think that's S-I-A-N. It's in the prophets. It indicates that there will be people from there worshiping the Messiah as well. So you see that in the midst of this tyranny, and the emails have indicated that, there's also a flourishing community of Christ followers who they persist despite the evil actions of their government. And that's something that should give us great joy, Simon, to know that there are believers in that place. It's sad, it's tragic that they lack the freedom to practice their faith in Christ. At the same time, it is a beautiful testimony of the power of the Holy Spirit that enables and strengthens and perseveres people in the midst of grave suffering and danger. The church in China is flourishing. There's a real need for Bibles to be given. I mean, there's videos and records of the actions of new believers in Christ in China, just desperate to have copies of the scriptures in their own language, and they will segment it. Sometimes I've heard one story where in one rural area there was a group of Christians, and they took parts of the Bible, and they each had a part of this one copy that they would read, and when they were done, they would pass the papers on to someone else. So.
Amazing. Yeah, so we need to pray for the Chinese underground church, that's for sure. The Winter Olympics, this is the 24th Winter Olympics, started its opening night on the 4th of February, last Friday, where it's officially opened with a fanfare of fireworks and artistic dance routines to mark the opening ceremony that will showcase sporting excellence. So at the beginning, it featured representatives of all 56 recognized ethnic groups, including the Uyghurs, standing together in harmony and passing the Chinese flag across the Beijing National Stadium. The theme of the opening ceremony was One World, One Family. Is that under Chinese control? Was represented by the image of a single snowflake and was the central showpiece from the beginning to the end of the ceremony. The theme was based on the ancient Chinese saying, which meant that a truly wise person sees the whole world as a family. So at this year's Winter Games in Beijing, there are 2,900 athletes, give or take, from 91 countries competing in 109 events. And we also see that the Chinese cross-country skier who lit the Olympic flame to mark the 24th Winter Olympics in Beijing was an Uyghur as well.
Yeah.
So it's
it's interesting. People noticed that. And you indicated that there were representatives from all of the various ethnicities that are found in China, 56 officially recognized, but the human rights activists noticed, okay, there's a Uyghur who is in this celebration, in this opening display. It's tragic that you can't help but think, okay, how much coercion is used? I mean, you can also look and think, well, okay, there's coercion. There's also the effect, potentially in some cases, of the re-education centers that are apparently found in various spots for the kind of brainwashing, I guess we could say, of various individuals into the CCP agenda who would otherwise not be. So I don't know the cross-country skier, I don't know the background that's there, but I think that one has to ask, okay, are they coercing their athletes in some cases? Are they brainwashing various athletes and silencing their real views? Is this something that Yilamuchang did under coercion, under threat to person or family? There's too many unknowns. China is so secretive about these things that I don't know that we'll ever fully know. But this has been dubbed the Genocide Games by critics. The 2022 Winter Olympics have already begun, and they're coming under scrutiny even though they've already been occurring the past couple of days. There will continue to be critique, I'm sure. Not that it's going to have any impact on the Olympic Committee in its future decision making, but exiled members of China's Uyghur Muslim population have told Daily Mail Australia that they've been cut off from any communication with family in the country's northwestern province of Xinjiang amid a brutal crackdown leading up to the Games. Rumila Kanisaf, who now lives in Adelaide and is president of the Australian Uyghur Tangrattak Women's Association, revealed to Daily Mail Australia that overseas Uyghurs have lost complete communication with their families and friends. And this is something perhaps, I think it's not just the Uyghurs in this situation, because China is very extreme in its censorship of Western social media platforms, or not even Western, global social media platforms, to the point that they have to use their own. Indeed, even in the use of their own social media platforms, that can very quickly go awry. There's this Chinese tennis star, very, very decorated. I believe she has won some majors previously, Peng Shui, and there's been real concern for her safety after she posted an accusation. I saw them trying to explain it away, and it's always, if it wasn't so serious, it'd be amusing to see how they're bending over backwards to explain. They said, because it's Chinese, the translation can be a few different things with slightly different connotations. Yes, one means rape, one means to force sex, one means essentially something else that basically is rape as well. So just sexual assault. Okay, is it not a crime? Is it not an assault of some sort? Can we not?
It was a high-ranking official within the Communist Party. So
she took that post down off of the.
I think the regime did.
Yeah, well, yeah, something happened, and she's only appeared in very heavily controlled environments just to assure everyone of her safety.
And we don't know if she's safe. I mean, I think it's the Lawn Tennis Association are boycotting China over this, and also many other tennis associations around the world. So if the tennis associations can do that, why can't the Olympic Committee, and why can't the West? Anyway,
the other day she said she would retire potentially because, which seems like a convenient.
Absolutely. So let's go now to this excellent CBN news report that looks into the Genocide Games, that is the Winter Olympics in Beijing 2022.
They have oppressed basically every dissent in China.
Wu Kai-shi should know. At age 21, he fled China for his leading role in the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989.
Wu Kai-shi is also Uyghur, and more than 1 million, maybe more, of his Muslim ethnic group are being held in concentration camps in China's Xinjiang province, prompting some human rights activists to call this week's Olympics the Genocide Games.
It's a country that use Olympic as a platform to show muscle to the world, while they're at the same time oppressing dissents or violating human rights within their own country.
The Chinese government has denied all accusations of any human rights abuse.
It creates a situation of plausible denial. It calls these concentration camps vocational training centers to eliminate poverty in the region, eliminate terror among Muslims, which is absolutely laughable. Our military is estimated 1 to 3 million of these Muslims have been incarcerated for indoctrination in these camps.
The United States, along with the UK, Australia, and Canada, are staging diplomatic boycotts of the Games by not sending government officials in protest of Beijing's human rights abuses.
We must show that the United States is an unyielding and unapologetic advocate for human rights, and unafraid of speaking the truth and upsetting General Secretary Xi and his Communist Party thugs.
Activists are urging athletes and sponsors to speak out during the Games.
Your silence is their strength. This is what they want more than anything, that the world will play by China's rules, that we will follow China's lead, that we will look away from these atrocity crimes for the sake of business as usual.
Meanwhile, it's business as usual as Beijing continues its typical crackdown on political and religious activists ahead of sensitive dates like Friday's opening ceremonies.
They round up the dissidents and known critics of the regime, or people that they think will speak out. They put them in detention. They're called black jails. They're hidden detention. It's unofficial. It's extrajudicial. And they do that as a preemptive strike so that there is no opportunity to protest.
With the eyes of the world turning toward Beijing, Voice of the Martyrs is launching PrayForChina2022.com to remind people to pray for China's Christians.
Christians are seen as a threat, their message is seen as a threat, and the government is doing everything in their power to keep that message from spreading.
China's President Xi Jinping has severely suppressed religious freedom in recent years, especially going after Christians. China sits at number 17 on Open Doors' World Watch list of the 50 most dangerous countries for Christians.
China is using a blanket of surveillance monitored by artificial intelligence to watch the movements of people of faith. It's even using facial recognition to monitor those who enter places of worship.
Thus far, thousands from more than 100 countries have pledged to pray during the Olympic Games.
We're going to see figure skating, we're going to see ski jumping, we'll probably see a lot of great shots of the Great Wall of China. We want every one of those things to be a reminder, hey, I have Christian brothers and sisters in China who are suffering because of the name of Jesus Christ. This is a great time to pray for them.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Thank you to CBN for that very helpful news report. We have some emails here to read out. Hi, Simon and Reagan. Were there many athletes that dropped out of competing because of their consciences with China's extreme and diabolical ways? This is from Charlie and Lynette. Simon, I've not heard of any athletes who have dropped out of competing. I have heard that there were some athletes, a group of athletes that had agreed to boycott the opening ceremony in protest. And of course, there is a diplomatic boycott, which the UK and the US are a part of, wherein we've sent athletes, but we have not sent any ministers or officials, and we won't be. Correct, yeah. So that's the way of dealing with it. The athletes are able to compete, and the idea has been that it's not really for the athletes to answer the cost of geopolitical issues. So the boycott is primarily political between those who would normally go under sponsorship packages and whatnot, who are like our Prime Minister or royalty. I mean,
there's also a debate, I think, a week before the Olympics, and this was saying how China was locking down some of its major cities because of a new variant of COVID-19 that was stronger than Omicron, and really it wasn't actually safe for the athletes to actually compete in Beijing. In the Winter Olympics. So there's a lot of question marks over whether China should have staged this in the first place just on health grounds, let alone on human rights grounds, or on the grounds that China is using its position in the world to assert its authority and its global dominance. And the world, very much like it was in the 1930s, was silent to what Hitler was doing to the Jewish people with the Nuremberg laws. And again, we're seeing the same oppression being carried out by the Communist Party of China on its own population, as well as clamping down on human rights in Hong Kong. And yet the world remains silent. Now, when it comes to in international relations, there has to be a reward of good and bad behavior. But you don't award a genocidal regime with the prestigious Winter Olympics without no conditions attached. And the fact that the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, are actually demanding that that they are not involved in politics, but there's also that reputation of the disconnect between the harmony and world peace and cooperation that is said on behalf of the Chinese regime and the Olympic Committee at the opening ceremony, and to trying to bring the world together in peace and harmony, and yet China is trying to dominate and control the world.
We have this from Johnny. For many years, we've been told China has been a fantastic success story. And I would say in many ways it has been throughout history. It had some dead days, you could say, where it was less impactful on the global sphere. But, you know, there's gunpowder, I believe the printing press actually was invented in China long before Gutenberg's printing press. There's medicine has a massive history of
the silk trade,
art, the silk trade. I mean, it has been a fantastic success story, and it's been billed as such, definitely for the past few years, and is so economically. You can look undeniably wherever it's coming from. It's beside the question. Whether it's ethical or moral is beside the question. Economically, is a powerhouse, right?
And now a military force as well.
Absolutely. Its military force is millions and millions of very, very highly trained soldiers. It's been allowed to invest heavily in Hollywood and pour money into U.S. academia and politics. There's a question, why has China suddenly become a bad actor? There's a theory that China has broken away from the Western elites who built the country into an economic powerhouse, and this is the reason for the sudden discovery of their evils. In any case, there'll be trouble ahead. Johnny, it's interesting. I think in fairness, there has been a lot of discussion of the evils in China. I can definitely remember going back into the mid-noughties, that there being discussion of persecution. Just look at the Great Leap Forward. Under Mao Zedong, you had 80 million plus who lost their lives through that. And this has been widely known and recognized. Have we done anything about it? No. Why? Because cheap labor, I suppose. If we're being brutally honest, I mean, we still have factories. There were so many U.S. car factories that just abandoned Detroit, especially in the mid-2000s.
It's the mid-90s. It was Bill Clinton's
that's right.
Drive to make China the manufacturing base of the world, and this is where we saw a massive investment from the US and from Britain and Europe to move to China to develop their manufacturing base, and of course that made China rich and extremely powerful, without really recognizing that China was still a kind of communist regime, and it's used its economy powerfully, but now it has a mass surveillance system in place, as we saw earlier, where they're able to control and monitor virtually their entire population, and there are around 6 billion spy cameras and motion spy cameras in China. It's a total big brother society with no freedom.
Quite a few of the viewers are thanking us for what they see as a very interesting topic this evening, and they're glad this subject was chosen. That's on Simon. It is a really relevant topic. Certainly, thank you to all for your encouraging comments who've written in. I was watching a documentary, Kel says, which stated that a lot of Holocaust survivors fled to Shanghai, which is true. There was actually a very large Jewish population in Shanghai, I believe in Hong Kong as well. In fact, Hong Kong, remember, was under British control until just around the turn of the millennium.
97.
So, yeah, and it's still actually, up until just a few years ago, was still enjoying a good measure of freedom. I was there in 2015 and 2016, and there were people openly evangelizing and propagating various religious beliefs. The Jehovah's Witnesses also were extremely active there, in very much the same way that they have been active in London, outside train stations and whatnot. So that wouldn't be allowed on the mainland. But now, I've had some conversations since. There is a great deal more caution, a great deal more suppression, a great deal more attempt to bring Hong Kong into the mainland way of doing things.
Which is tragic for the people of Hong Kong.
Yes.
Earlier today, I recorded a Zoom interview with Gary Lane from CBN. He hosts the program Global Lane, and this is his take on China hosting the 2022 Winter Olympics. We're now joined on Behind the Headlines from the States, Gary Lane, who hosts the program, The Global Lane. Gary, it's great to see you on Behind the Headlines.
Good to be with you, Simon.
And Gary, you are somewhat of an expert when it comes to China now. Your programs that you produce for CBN on China and the news reports you give are so informative, and we're not seeing that anywhere else in the mainstream media. Why do you think that the mainstream media are not really reporting the news of what's happening with China in terms of their abuse of human rights, their taking away freedoms in Hong Kong, their intimidation of Taiwan, and their general dominance that we're seeing around the world today?
Well, Simon, I think if you're based in China, you're a journalist based in China, you have any criticism of the Chinese government, and they'll either kick you out or arrest you. And so it's very risky for journalists to base in China and report from there. But I think here in the United States, we have throughout our society, it goes all the way from big tech, Silicon Valley, to Washington, Capitol Hill, the White House, and beyond, education, Wall Street. There are many people that have been involved. These are elites that are making money off of China. And this creeps into the media as well, some of the media people as well. And it's also in American sports and the National Basketball Association and other sports here, professional sports. But Peter Schweizer is someone that I've known for 30 years. He's an investigative reporter, and he's written a number of books about corruption over the years. And his most recent is called Red Herring, How American Elite Helped China Win. And basically, it's about all the deals that they're making throughout our society with China. It started back when the door was open to China with Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger 50 years ago this month, I might add. And it's continued. And basically, he maintains that the United States and other Western countries, such as your own, have made China what it is today.
Quite frightening when we look at the prospect of what China is today. Gary, we know that the Winter Olympics are currently taking place in Beijing right now, and there's been many international calls for these to be boycotted. Why do you think that the West and the Olympic Committee have not boycotted these Olympic Games?
Well, I think because they're in the back pocket of China. It isn't just the United States, it's the Olympic Committee, it's other countries around the world. Everybody is making money on China, and they don't want that gravy train to end. And the Olympic Committee should not have allowed it in China, but they did. So there's a global boycott. The Uyghur people especially, I mean, they just had a big protest in Washington. They had another one in, I think it was Istanbul. I think it was in Turkey. At least I think it was Istanbul. I know it was in Turkey. But they've been protesting about the detention of 3 million Uyghurs in forced labor camps, the Lao guy. And they're re-educating them because they fear them, because they're Muslims. They think they're radical. They're from a part of Western China that wants to be independent from China. And they're Turkic people, the Uyghurs, and they're not really Chinese. And China really fears them. So what they've done is they've arrested them. 3 million of them, as many as 3 million are in these camps, and they're forcing them to perform. I mean, many of these Olympic souvenirs, I've been told, have been made by Uyghur people in these forced labor camps. So don't buy anything from China that has the Olympics on it. It's probably made by a Uyghur. If you're concerned about human rights, I wouldn't do that.
But we have to ask the big question, don't we? In all of everything that China's done, particularly with its treatment of its Uyghur community, its persecution of Christians and other religious minorities, and really clamping down on human rights in China, and yet the world is silent, and yet we hear the representative of the Chinese Olympic Committee talking about tolerance and global cooperation and freedom. And yet there's a huge disconnect from what they're saying to their actual actions. Are we seeing the West is incredibly weak when it comes to China for not actually boycotting these Winter Olympic Games? And this probably should have been done 2 years ago.
I think the most absurd thing, if you really, I mean, think of where this has gone now. There are two athletes that actually lit the Olympic torch at the opening ceremonies. One is a Uyghur woman, a cross-country skier who's a Uyghur. Now, when the Chinese Foreign Ministry was asked about this, one of their representatives basically said, "Well, you know, we have ethnic people here because this is really, these sports and these games are really about protecting the health of the people." Think about that for a minute. Protecting the health of the people. I don't think the Uyghurs would agree with that. How are you protecting their health when you're rounding them up and putting them in prison and forcing them to do forced labor? I mean, that is absurd. And I talked to Dr. Richard Land. He'll be on the Global Lane on Thursday evening here in the U.S. Dr. Richard Land is the former president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary. And he wrote an amazing article in the Christian Post about this. And he was telling me, he said, look, this is the same, think about it. If the Nazis had a Jew light the torch in 1939 at the Olympics there, he said, it's the same thing, having a Uyghur light the torch. It's just, it's absurd. And the world is going along with it because no one wants to stand up to China.
And Gary, like you said, there have been parallels made of the Winter Olympic Games in China in 2022 with the Berlin Olympics held in 1936. And again, what do you think that China wants to use the Olympics for? Is it to grandstand their nation, to show that they are a global player now on the world stage and that they are a force to be reckoned with? Very much same that Hitler wanted to do with Nazi Germany in the mid-1930s.
I think so. It makes China become important to the world. And the way they present this, if we have this perfect Olympics, the world will love China and realize what a great country we are, and that we're not to be feared, that we are the way to go for the world. I mean, just look how we've conducted ourselves in the Olympics. But it's all a facade. I mean, you remember, Simon, years ago on the border of North Korea, there was a village, I think they called it the Peace Village. And it looked like from the South Korean side, looking through binoculars over to North Korea, into North Korea, it looked like this major village or city. And come to find out, it was like a movie set. It was like a Hollywood movie set, just a facade. There was really nothing there. And that's how it is with China. They want to put on this best face, this perfect face for the world, but behind the facade, they are torturing Uyghurs, forcing women, Uyghurs especially, to have abortion. They're trafficking in human organs. And they're also persecuting Christians and other groups that oppose the communist regime there. And there'll come a time when finally the world will have to say it's time to stop. But that isn't happening right now. They're forming a new alliance, an axis with Russia and other countries now, where I think there's some other countries that saying, look, after Afghanistan, we can't depend on the United States. Let's go with this alliance that Russia and China are forming. Maybe we can get money from them. And that's what the Chinese are doing. They're throwing their money around the world.
And Gary, we see there is a diplomatic boycott by Western nations, including Britain and the United States. Do you think this will have any impact whatsoever on China?
No, a diplomatic boycott has no impact whatsoever. I mean, it's really meaningless because there are still people that are going, and we even had diplomats here in the U.S. that were applying for visas. They wanted to go despite the boycott. I don't know if the Biden administration has allowed them to do that, but there are people from the administration that wanted to go. But beyond that, Simon, the only boycott that would really work is the Olympic Committee saying, look, you're not going to have these Olympics, China. We're going to deny you the Olympics. They didn't do that. They'd move forward, and so be it. I mean, that's the way it is. A diplomatic boycott will have no effect whatsoever.
And Gary, do you think whilst the Winter Olympics are taking place, and in some ways have to feel sorry for these elite athletes that are competing in this year's Olympic Games, that if it was boycotted, then that's almost 4 years of training to compete at the highest level of sport? But we saw back in 2020 with COVID-19 that all intelligence and security experts believe that it came out of the Wuhan lab, which would indicate really that China is kind of pretty much responsible for the chaos the world has gone through and the deaths and the misery over the past 2 years. Shouldn't that be a reason in itself to have actually boycotted China for this 2022 Olympic Games?
Well, sure, beyond the human rights issue, I mean, look at COVID-19. The Chinese have not allowed any investigation. They haven't allowed anybody to come in there and find out what really happened. Did this really come from bat meat, as they suggested, in the market nearby? Or did it come from the lab? Well, growing evidence shows that it came from the lab, and that U.S. Agencies were actually involved in gain-of-function research, supporting gain-of-function research. And Congress has been looking into that. We've had a number of hearings here in the U.S., and Senator Rand Paul is someone who's really on top of that. So I would, if you're interested in that, go and look up on YouTube or other videos Senator Rand Paul and see what he has said about that. But it's amazing. Yes, it's not just the human rights, COVID-19, and I think if we had denied them, or the Olympic Committee, the world had denied them the right to have the Olympics, and they had used that as the reason, until you allow us to get in and really do a thorough investigation of the origins of COVID-19, you're not going to have the Olympics. Maybe they would have allowed something, at least a little something, if that was hanging over their head.
And seeing that China is emerging as the world leading superpower, and you've already outlined the horrendous human rights abuses by the Communist Party of China against its own Muslim communities and against Christians and other minorities. How important is it that the Christians pray for the situation in China, to pray for the Christians, to pray for this situation? As Christians, what can we really do about China's oppressive behavior?
Well, I've got to say again, I talked to Richard Land, and you know, he's really talking about morality and ethics and where we should stand as believers. And he said, look, it's up to you if you want to boycott the Olympics. He said, I will add that NBC here in the United States has the lowest ratings of any television broadcast of Olympics ever. So people are boycotting, they're not watching. But he said, look, beyond that, we as believers need to pray for China. Especially for our brothers and sisters in Christ who are persecuted and suffering in China. You and I have talked about that before. I think your viewers know very well what's going on there on that front, but also pray for the country. Pray for the Uyghurs and other people of other faith, the Falun Gong. I mean, sure, I mean, this is a cult, but they're terribly persecuted as well. People are being persecuted in China simply for their faith. And, you know, remember the old saying, you know, they came after, who was it that said that? Do you remember, Simon, about they came after this group, and then they came after that group, and I did nothing, and then they finally came after me, and there was no one else to help me. I can't quite remember who said that, but that's an old quote, and it's so true. So we need to pray for the Uyghurs. We need to pray for the Falun Gong, the people of China, and pray for the government, the communist government. Pray that they will know the truth, and the truth will set them free, that they will know the truth of a relationship with Jesus Christ. So that's the only way to eternity. And I mean, we need to keep praying as believers.
Amen. Gary, just thank you so much for being my guest on today's Behind the Headlines. And thank you for the excellent work you do through your excellent program, The Global Lane.
You're welcome.
Pleasure.
Thanks to Simon and Gary Lane there for that very helpful and insightful interview. This is a first-hand experience from Lydia. We used to be missionaries in 1996 to 97 for a few years, and the oppression of the Uyghurs was happening then. Wow. Due to the return of Hong Kong, they had tanks on the streets then as well. Unfortunately, it is not new, and indeed, this has been going on. You would be all too familiar with China's constant repression. Really, ever since Mao Zedong, this has been a massive, massive problem where across ethnic groups, religious groups, millions losing their lives.
Regan, do you think this has a lot to do with the fact that the International Olympic Committee and the world allowed China to host the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games, Summer Games, and which of course we saw, which was a spectacular Summer Olympics. And they used that as a kind of springboard then to test and further strengthen their status as a world power.
Well, I think in 2008, it was in many ways groundbreaking Summer Olympics. And perhaps the hope was, well, they gave us a groundbreaking Summer Olympics in 2008. It was an absolute mega show, particularly the opening ceremony. China did very, very well in the medal table also on that occasion. Perhaps the Winter Olympics could do with a similar reboot. Athens in 2004 in the summer was a bit disappointing. 2008 gave the Summer Olympics a much needed boost. Perhaps they thought, well, Beijing could give us a boost now. I don't know, Simon, but I'm certain you can follow the money and you have the answer. Dear Simon and Reagan, recently viewed a podcast interview of Patrick Wood speaking about the people and structures that are controlling our world. According to him, China can be considered a technocracy rather than a communist society. He would define a technocracy as a resource-based economic system established by means of the science of social engineering, aligning with Klaus Schwab's Great Reset and going forward to explain what has happened in our society the last 2 years. Very interesting insight there. Robert, Anita says, lovely to see you both. China is so powerful now, I think there is reluctance to speak against them. Their human rights policies are shocking, but only those who are interested really seem to care about this. Anyone who doesn't adhere to the regime's doctrines risks death. The way they treat their animals is shocking too. They seem to be devoid of any sense of compassion. The Chinese are possibly, I'll say that CCP is possibly the biggest threat that the rest of the world face. Prior to the death camps Hitler used, re-education camps, the Chinese regime are every bit as evil. And it's a heinous thing. They're doing this to their own people. Absolutely. The CCP is...
But there was one individual that was there at the opening ceremony who met the Chinese President, Xi Jinping, and that was Vladimir Putin of Russia. And they had a very good talks and relationship, and we're seeing a development of relationship between China, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and Russia as foes against the West. And it's so sad that there are no Western leaders who have the moral courage or fortitude to stand up against this communist regime in China, for the devastation and the destruction they're calling around the world, for the genocide, and actually to allow them to host the Winter Olympics in 2022 is a shocking indictment of our society.
Well, Aileen and at least one other believe that perhaps Russia is holding off on invading Ukraine until the Winter Games are over, and they've made some sort of deal with China, but definitely they are in close alliance, and that says it all, really. Simon, it's been a great program. Thank you very much for coming up with this topic.
Pleasure. And I just want to thank you for watching this program today. We need to urgently pray for Christians and religious minorities in China, and that China's evil deeds would be exposed in the times that we're living in. So I want to thank you for watching Behind the Headlines, as we've touched on the moral issues surrounding the Winter Olympics in Beijing in 2022. And it's about time that the Western world, with its Judeo-Christian heritage, stand up against the evil that we're seeing in China today. So thank you for watching Behind the Headlines.